Hello and welcome back to the Market Maker podcast, where today I'm joined by Terri Duhon, a Wall Street trader turned board director, TEDx speaker, author, and award-winning educator. From growing up in rural Louisiana in the US to studying maths at MIT, leading a global trading team, and now shaping strategy in the boardroom of companies like Morgan Stanley International and the fintech startup Wise, and is also an associate fellow at Oxford University. This journey that you're about to hear from Terri is extraordinary. And in this episode, we're going to dive into some really cool things like resilience, financial independence, and what real empowerment looks like, especially for women in finance. So Terri, thrilled to have you with us. And how are you?
I am thrilled to be here.
One of the things here, when I first met you and we were talking before and through a fellow kind of colleague that John, who introduced us, growing up in rural Louisiana, I was like, what were they putting in the water in this place in Louisiana for you and John to have come from that place? And then you ended up studying at MIT. So I just wanted to get a sense of how do you go from a rural setting and what was that childhood and upbringing look like, and the visibility and access to these opportunities, to then going to one of the most prestigious universities in the world?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I'm incredibly lucky to start with. My parents hugely valued education. And I was also in a state, Louisiana. Many people would consider it probably one of the states with the worst education systems. And yet it had a school, a boarding school, actually, situated at a university in a university town, which was like a magnet school. I think there are different terms for magnet schools, but they would go around the state and see if there were any students who were particularly keen on an academic education, and would invite them to apply for their junior and senior year of high school. It's a bit like sixth form, I guess, here in the UK. And they came to my school and visited, and my mama found the pamphlet in my backpack. And she said to me, Terri Lynn, this looks amazing. She was from Texas. She had a heavy accent. And I think you got to do this. And yes, ma'am, I'll take a look. So I applied and I was lucky enough to be accepted, and it transformed my life, really, those 2 years. And it's funny because, of course, you mentioned John. I knew John, and he was 1 year older than me. So we overlapped by a year. I didn't know him well, obviously. I was in the girls' dorm. He was in the boys' dorm. And I'm not going to say I was uber confident with the opposite sex back in those days. And it was later when somebody from Louisiana contacted me from the school and said, by the way, did you know that John Norman is living in London and working at JP Morgan? And I was just amazed, and I reached out. And because of our shared background, which is very, very similar, we've become good friends. And I think we would both consider ourselves very lucky that we were able to have that opportunity. It was life-changing for us. And certainly without that, I don't think MIT would have been an option for me, actually. So I was very lucky.
Did the boarding school, I'm assuming because it was a magnet school, as you referred to it, so were you already put into the mindset where the transition into MIT felt fairly natural because most of the people were going to target schools? Or was it like imposter syndrome?
No.
What am I doing here?
No, look, okay, so I have huge imposter syndrome. And even when I was at that high school, I actually felt very different from everybody else. I felt I was coming from a very, very poor family. We lived in a trailer. And, there were lots of other people who may have felt that way, but it's hard to see from the outside that sense of difference. So I didn't necessarily know that. My perspective is that there seemed to be all these people who seem to have, money to own a car, to go to school in, or seem to have all these fabulous clothes, or new textbooks, or new backpacks, or just things that just seemed out of reach for me. And I definitely felt very different. And look, MIT, Yale, where John went, MIT, Yale, all of the Ivy Leagues, these are reach schools for everyone. There's no single person on the planet that simply says, "Oh, I think I'm going to go to Harvard today," and waltzes in the door. It's not how it works. And so for me, MIT was a reach. And in fact, I'll be very honest, I 100% knew as a result of going to that school that I wasn't the biggest genius in the room. There were some very, very clever people that I was at school with in Louisiana, and I was in awe of these people. But I thought to myself, you know what? I'm good enough to go. So I just have to figure out how to get them to notice me. And that's probably one of the biggest lessons, is to remove perceived obstacles, right? MIT is not necessarily looking for the biggest geniuses in the world. They're looking for clever people who work hard, can do the work, but also can contribute, not just to the MIT community, but to the world at large. What are they going to be able to contribute? And I thought, well, I'm going to make myself stand out. I'm going to show them that I'm a dancer, and I'm going to explain my personality through dance. And so I choreographed this dance where I explained that I was a Gemini. And so I had two different personalities, and I had music. It was a Gershwin song that changes tempo a bit, and to show my two different personalities. And, this is back in the day when, not everybody was videoing themselves in their bedroom and posting it 20 times a day, dancing around. This was back in the day where you had to go and find someone and borrow a camera, which was as big as a small dog, and video yourself and then watch it. There was no editing software. There was nothing, we watched it on a television and then, decided if it was good enough. And I actually redid the whole thing, re-recorded the whole thing. There wasn't, there was no editing. There was actually just redoing the whole thing, which was a bit of fun, and mailing it in the real mail, along with my paper application that went into MIT. And I'm pretty sure it's what got me in, because when I arrived on day one, the admissions people came over and said, "We remember your video. That was fabulous. We really enjoyed that." And I thought, you see, I just needed to stand out, and now I just have to get through. Now I just have to make it through, because it's not a sail in the park. It was a lot of work, but I did it. So I was over the moon.
Well,
to be fair,
we might have a run at the most unconventional route into MIT here in this episode. So yeah, that's an awesome story. So just moving on then. So from your early part of your career, spending a decade on a trading floor and eventually running a global team, just now that you look back retrospectively, what do you think you learned about yourself during that particular period of time?
I learned, so much. I particularly learned some of the skills that I was really good at. And they were not the things that schools make you think about. Schools make you think about, are you good at math, or are you good at English? Are you a STEM? Are you liberal arts? And, do you like reading and analyzing text, or do you want to do a bunch of really complex math? The truth is that finance is not about math, really. If you're comfortable with numbers and you can multiply up to 12, that's probably as much as you need to do. That's probably as much as I ever did, really, on the trading floor. Now, to be fair, there was somebody else doing the really complex stuff in a back room without windows somewhere. They did the really hard stuff, and I got to use those models. But I did have to understand the output, and it had to make sense to me. But broadly, it's another myth busted. you don't have to be the biggest math genius to go into finance. You just need to know how to multiply and be comfortable with numbers. But the thing that I did learn about myself is that I was really good at making things happen. And what does that mean? I could I could GSD, as I jokingly call it. I could get shit done. So if I needed to make a project happen, I needed to get a presentation out to a client. So I needed a junior person to write the presentation. I needed some numbers to be created by the team over there. I needed to approve some wording from this team over there. I needed the legal guys to check it out. I needed the compliance guys or the branding guys, or I could make that happen. I could move it along. I could get people on board. I could bring people together. I could manage to make things happen, and I could get it to happen fast and quick. And I could help people through complex problems. And when people threw obstacles at me, I could figure out how to get through them and navigate them. And those are not skills that you're necessarily taught anywhere, right? You have to figure them out. You have to, it's a bit like study skills, but it's also about, herding cats skills. And, everybody wants to go in a different direction. So you've got to pull everybody together and push them along. It's some leadership skills and some management skills. And it's not often taught almost anywhere. It's something you have to figure out if you can do. And I figured it out really quickly. Well, really quickly. I did figure it out. And I learned that I wasn't loving being a trader. I wasn't totally loving marketing, although I was never really in a marketing team. I did love structuring, but really I wanted to be the person that kind of drove the deals, making the deals happen. That was really fun. And what I figured out as well was that the way I described my skill set, it was kind of hard to put me into a specific team. And because I wanted to own different bits of the process and pull it all together. And that's not how the trading floor had been organized. And so there was a little bit of friction with what I was trying to do versus what the natural organization of the institution was trying to do. But I learned a lot about how to navigate all of that. And it was far more valuable over time than the partial differential equations class, if I'm honest.
Next question. You've I guess I'm getting an answer for that already to some extent, because I was going to ask, how did it feel stepping away from a front office trading seat into start something new, eventually going into these boardroom roles? What drew you to that? But am I right in thinking it was that strategic element and this ability to influence and see all parts?
I'll tell you, the truth is that when I first joined JP Morgan, it was clear almost on day one that I was not going to work my way up that corporate ladder. And I knew almost immediately. And in fact, I knew instantly because of the watch. My watch story. There was a wonderful guy who came and gave all the analysts this big presentation, and he showed us his watch, and he was so proud of his watch. He held it up and he said he had received it for 25 years of service at JP Morgan. And I almost hyperventilated because I thought, oh my goodness, this guy has been working longer than I've been alive in one place, and he has a watch to show for it. And I don't want to demean at all his achievement. He had done some amazing things, but it did not resonate with me at all, that pathway. And I knew I was not going to stay. I just didn't know what was next for me. And leaving was hard because one of the things that those large, big organizations do is they tell you that you are so lucky to be there. You are so lucky to be in that seat. And that seat has value. You're just lucky to be sitting in it. And when you leave, you feel like you're walking away from this unbelievable opportunity. How could you possibly give that up? It's crazy. And yet it no longer resonated with me. And I knew I needed to leave. It was time. And let's be honest, I didn't like the politics of navigating my way up as some people say, the greasy pole. I wasn't mature enough to do it. I think I could probably do it today, but even today I might lose my patience. And, working within a large organization is tricky. It takes a certain personality. And so I left and I started my own thing, and it was amazing. But honestly, I had identified as a trader or a structurer for so long that when I stepped out of that role, I had almost an identity crisis. I knew I was going to become an entrepreneur. I knew I was setting up a new business, but I felt like I had to reinvent myself, and thus became my journey of reinvention on a pretty regular basis, actually. Just learning that I could reinvent myself. I had the power to reinvent myself. And it was a wonderful way to kind of open up all of my options for the future.
So great. And actually the process of doing that, I think hopefully we can dive into some of that with the subsequent follow-up questions now to kind of break that down, because while that's a fantastic journey of self-exploration and development, I'm sure there's lots of questions of like, yeah, but how do you have the confidence to do that? Like, in that respect.
So, and it's not, what, we've talked a bit about imposter syndrome. It's less confidence and more, one might say, bravery. Somebody else might say blind stupidity, stepping into the unknown. But I call it bravery. It was definitely, look, it was terrifying, really scary. And yet I knew I had to do it. And it was the right thing for me. And so I did it. I was brave. And it's interesting. There's a book called Be Brave, Not Perfect, and it's targeted at women, where the idea is that culturally and socially, we encourage, without necessarily saying it out loud, we encourage women to be perfect. And so women don't try new things, don't put themselves out there, not because they're necessarily afraid or they are lacking confidence, but they think they need to be perfect in order to do things. And that perceived obstacle is one of the things that stops people. And I love that phrase, be brave, not perfect. And I can certainly relate. I can tell you I was brave rather than perfect. That's for sure. And being brave is the first step, obviously. But, let's take it back a step. It's more than that. It's about dreaming big. You're not a function of who you are today. You are entirely a function of your future potential. So, dig deep. What is that future potential? It's huge. It's huge in all of us. And if you remove those perceived obstacles, if you let yourself dream and say, what if I weren't afraid? What if I just took a leap? What if I just tried? What if I told people I wanted to run the firm? What would they say? What's the worst thing that could happen? And, what are you scared of? Maybe they'll laugh. I have been laughed at. People have laughed to my face about some of my dreams. And it hurts. Yeah, it hurts. But you got to start. You got to start somewhere. So dream big. That's the first step, right? You've got to dream big.
I'm feeling pumped now. But because I know that, when we've spoken before, you've done, you're a motivational speaker. You've been involved with schools, so impacting people at a very formative years of their development. You're on the Women on Boards as an ambassador on that network as well. So I guess this next part then is a series of questions around going deeper into some of these topics, which is women, self-selection, financial independence, all I know things you care deeply about, but have some really good structural ways on how to meet these challenges. So going into the first one of those. So you've spoken about how women often self-select out of opportunities. You've kind of inferred that from some of what you've described so far. Why do you think that happens? And more importantly, what can we do to change that?
Well, a lot of it is perception, self-perception. Again, these perceived obstacles or what society teaches us. And I'll give you a few concrete examples. So I was I ran a course at the Said Business School at Oxford University, where I'm an associate fellow. And the course was called Financial Market Trading. And it was a tough course. It was considered really tough, actually. And I didn't realize how much I was asking of them until I did the first year. And then the feedback came that I was the toughest teacher they had ever had, but the most fun. I'm going to say the most fun, but the hardest. And I thought to myself, well, this is fantastic. I'm teaching what's considered a relatively technical course. I think I might be one of the only female lecturers in a technical space. I'm going to get all these women coming into my class. And at the time, Said was about 30% female. And out of the 100 students, I capped the class at 100 students because it's hard to grading and you got to interact with all of these. I capped the class at 100 students. Out of 100 students, I got about 10 women that first year. And I thought, well, hang on, this is even disproportionate from the number of women in the program itself. This is what could possibly be going on. And the research tells us that women self-select out of things where they are where society has told them they're not going to be very good. And if you overlay that with the idea that society's told them they have to be perfect, so not only are they not going to be potentially not going to succeed in this, but they're supposed to be perfect. So how can they possibly take that risk? And the issue, the area that society implies that women are not very good at is numbers. And you can see it in schools when you look at, and there's some research on this, when you look at co-ed schools, and I think the research is around the US. You look at co-ed schools, you'll see that more boys go into STEM subjects and more girls go into liberal arts. Now, of course, we're all talking about STEM, so this might be changing. I haven't seen recent statistics. But if you looked at all boys schools and all girls schools, you see equal numbers of boys and girls going into STEM and going into liberal arts. And the truth is, this push from society for boys to do STEM and girls to do liberal arts, boys do the hard subjects and girls do the soft stuff, terminology I really hate. But this push for society that for us to do this, to segregate ourselves this way, I mean, first off, it's not fair to anybody, right? If we say, well, boys have to do STEM, well, what about the boys that really want to do the liberal arts? And if we say girls have to do liberal arts, what about the girls that really want to do STEM? And then you overlay that with the idea that actually what we're really saying, society is really saying, is that girls aren't any good with numbers. And that is it, that is really frustrating. And you can see it. You see it in so many places. I'll give you another example where it manifests itself. A lot of women who took my class, who were brave enough to take my class at Oxford, would then call me up after, and they would say, look, I'm applying to, private equity, or I'm applying to hedge funds, or I'm applying to banks. And the feedback I'm getting from my interviews is that I would be amazing in a sales role. And actually what I really want is an investing role or a trading role or, a more analytical role. But I'm being railroaded into a role because of my gender. And ultimately, it is no one's fault. So there's no point in blame or getting angry. The important thing, I think, is to be aware that no one is necessarily saying you can't do it, but there is an unconscious bias that people are acting on. So you just have to hit it on the head, and you have to say, well, hang on a minute. I'm going to be brave. I'm going to take this class. I'm going to be brave. I'm going to go for the job I really want and not the job I'm being told that I should do because of my gender. I'm going to be brave. And when someone says I should do something else, I'm going to tell them, I love your feedback. Thank you so much for that. But I'm actually really, really good at the numbers and I'd really like to do this job. And then when you get into that role, you prove yourself. And I'm sorry to say, you're going to have to do that a few times probably along your journey, but it's okay. Don't get angry. Just, it is what it is. Our goal, all of us today, is to, get into these organizations, to put ourselves forward for the jobs we want, not the jobs we should have for our gender, and work our way up and change it from the inside and change people's perception of what we can do. And I think it's, look, there are lots of ways to impact and change the world. And I think one of them is encouraging women to do exactly what they believe they can do, what they know they can do.
When women do opt out early, it's not just about that opportunity or that job or that promotion. This can create a lifelong impact on financial literacy, financial independence as well. So how does that cycle come into it in later life that young women probably are maybe not quite thinking about at that moment in time, but is very important?
Well, I think, look, there are so many different paths that people can take, and there are lots of other pressures on people outside of career choices. And, socially, there's, partnership, marriage, maybe children, or maybe you become primary caregiver. Maybe you become primary caregiver not just of children, or maybe not of children, but maybe of aging parents or relatives. There are so many competing pulls on your time, and of course, depending on where you live, you're going to feel them in different ways. And we all make compromises. All of us, not just women, obviously, all of us make compromises along the way. But one of the things that I do talk about is financial independence. I think it is a really critical part of every individual's journey. And again, it's not very gender specific, although it can be gender specific. So financial independence is critical. And what that means is if you feel the pressure from society that tells you that you're not very good at numbers, or maybe finances are a little complicated. Again, I want to repeat, you just need to be able to multiply. I know we can all multiply. So there is no barrier for women to understand their own finances and to understand how to be financially independent. But, the important thing is that you think to yourself, what does my future look like? And how do I get there in a safe and secure way? And one of the sayings we have in the US is that most women are one death or one divorce away from the breadline, which implies, now it's an old saying, and again, I'm hoping that saying is going away and it's changing. But the implication has been in the past that women are not financially independent. And it's a critical journey that we all have to go on. And it's one we should not be afraid of, because honestly, you just need to multiply. The issue, the reason it gets complicated or seems complicated, is that it's full of vocabulary. Now, if you think about that, it's kind of funny, because actually what women are told in school is that they're really good at liberal arts. They're really good at reading and learning vocabulary. And actually, financial independence is more about vocabulary than it is about numbers. So again, that perceived barrier, take it away and just ensure that you've got the independence that we all deserve and need.
And another part of that journey then, to believe that they can take ownership almost to find their own destiny, I guess comes down to confidence. And for me, as being someone who works with a community all of the time, I get to interact with these amazing young women. I can only sympathize to a certain degree because I am fundamentally different in a way. And how I've been treated by society has been different in that way of being a guy. So you having worked with the Prince's Trust, Speakers for Schools, what makes a difference when it comes to building confidence in young women?
You know what really makes a difference? So I've talked about being brave, not perfect. I've talked about just taking risk, right? It's okay to try and do something that's a little scary. It is critical that you reach inside and you know yourself and figure out what is possible. What does the future you look like? Dream really big. Those are important steps. However, probably the most important bit on this journey is that everybody's journey is unique. So your journey is your own, but you're not alone. You can do this with the support of the community around you, right? Make sure that you have people around you who are prepared to support you. You have a phone a friend, you have a family member or somebody who's sitting there and is your personal cheerleader. And as much as you cheer them on, they cheer you on. And if you don't feel you have that, you need to go and cultivate that. We all need a support system around ourselves. We're human. We need that connection. And so while your path is your own and your hopes and your dreams are your own, your future potential is your own. You are not alone.
It's almost so simple, but so powerful. I guess it's that whole leap of faith to have the trust, to be confident to make those decisions.
But also, just say to yourself, you know what? This is going to fail. I'm going to do it, but it's going to fail. That's what I say. I'm going to do it, but it's going to fail. I hope it goes well, but I expect them to say no or laugh in my face. What's the worst that could happen? And I kind of role play with myself. What's the worst that can happen? They're going to laugh at me. Okay, I can deal with laugh. They're going to laugh. So what? They're idiots. I'm going to waltz in and I'm going to say, this is what I'd like to do. And they laugh and off I go. I go and cry in the bathroom and call my best friend who says, Terri, you're amazing. You can do this. Don't worry. They don't know what they're talking about. Just don't give up. And that's the path we all have to be prepared to take. Look, life isn't easy at any stage. So nothing, we shouldn't expect that all of these steps forward are going to be a walk in the park. So along the way, we've all taken risk in so many different ways. Why not take it as well with what you'd like to achieve and what your, hopes and dreams are?
I totally agree. I'm the father of 2 young daughters, and I can see firsthand from being a parent how different the girls are treated to the boys, even at a very young primary school age. So when society is putting the burden of perfection on them, what are small little practical things that you can do to get comfortable to being brave?
Well, I think role models are changing a bit for girls, and I think that's really important. My daughter did something amazing when she was about 7. And she had decided to join the parkour club at her school. And, parkour where you crawl on the wall and you jump around and slide on the railings and all of this. And she was the only girl. And the school told the club members to line up on the sidewalk. So there was a line of boys, and then Aspen was in this line somewhere. And all the boys were acting out. And my daughter was, I think she was just standing there for some reason. And one of the teachers came by and said, come on, boys, something like, come on, boys, look at Aspen. I mean, can't you behave like like Aspen? I mean, this is, behave yourselves, be a bit more like Aspen. And Aspen turned to him and she said, whoa, don't expect that just because I'm a girl that I'm going to behave a certain way. She was so offended because she felt that it was some gender slur that had just occurred. And she was furious and she came home so angry. And I thought, wow, good for you. She said, just because I'm a girl, don't expect me to be, she said something like, don't expect me to be perfect. And I thought, wow, where did she get that from? Because they're who knows? Everybody's a little different. Thankfully, that's what makes the world interesting. But I think that the role models are changing, and I think that's fantastic. And I think you just encourage the the strong and capable role models, the ones that make you comfortable as a parent. There are so many to choose from. Look, I don't want to judge, and I think I have to tell you that I have never had a job as hard as being a parent. And so gosh, I was so judgy before I was a parent. Oh, I'm never going to let my kid do that. I'm never going to let my kid do that. Oh my goodness, what terrible parenting. I had no idea, really no idea how hard it was.
Right. And look, I'm just conscious of your time. So I think there's so much that you've shared that's been amazing. I just wondered whether if you were going to distill it down to one simple message to young women listening to this, who might be, bright, curious, but unsure about finance as an area. You've kind of talked about the numbers aspect and the multiplication aspect. Is there anything else you would like them to hear as a final message?
Look, I'm final message. You are not alone. Dream big. Take risk. Be brave. Do not give up. Use your community. You are not alone. Do not give up. You can do this.
Amazing. Thank you, Terri, so much for your time, your insights. It's been brilliant.
You're welcome.